Motion pictures made their debut in Modesto during the second decade of the last century. There was the Star Theater on 10th Street, where the old Crest building presently stands. The Isis Theater featured films that had been licensed and censored. The Modesto Theater, built in 1912, was the very first to show talking pictures. It also featured vaudeville shows and community events. You can still see the dome of what was once the Modesto Theater on 10th Street. Other local theaters included the Lyric, later named the Esquire. The Quonset Hut-styled La Loma Theater once stood at the corner of Yosemite and La Loma next to the former Forest Department Store. The Richards Theater on J Street featured second-run films, serials, and westerns. It underwent several name changes, including the National, the Princess, and finally, the Covell. In 1921, Modesto's Strand Theater celebrated its grand opening with a showing of The Mark of Zorro, starring the swashbuckling Douglas Fairbanks. With a capacity of 1,800, a mighty Wurlitzer organ, elaborate murals, and an Art Nouveau curtain, the Strand was advertised as the Valley's finest theater. All of these theaters slowly declined, and many fell to the Wreckers' Ball. The State Theater, which opened in 1934, could have suffered a similar fate, but fortunately for our community, that didn't happen. This is the story of Modesto's historic State Theater. Beginning in the 1990s and continuing today, local citizens came to the rescue to save Modesto's remaining historic theater and to ensure its continued operation. The State first opened its doors on December 25, 1934. The theater was designed by S. Charles Lee, one of the nation's outstanding designers of Art Deco movie houses. The architect's motto was, "The show starts on the sidewalk." The architect's plan was brought to life in Modesto by local builder Harry Brown at a cost of $100,000. The first film shown at the new State Theater was Flirtation Walk, starring Dick Powell, Ruby Keeler, and Pat O'Brien. It was accompanied by La Cucaracha, a romantic melody drama of old Mexico. General admission was 35 cents, loges were 40 cents, and children got in for a dime. Jack Ulrich, who at a very young age managed the State Theater shortly after it opened, describes his efforts to promote the new State Theater.
They let me do the advertising for the theater. I had my little car, covered it with the prizes, and drove around like that to advertise. When we were playing I believe it was called Old Chicago, went up on the roof and we got some smudge pots and put them along the edge and had them blowing smoke, which someone thought it was on fire, and the fire engines came and so forth, and turned out to be just one of my ideas that boomeranged a little bit.
2 years ago, when they had the grand opening of this theater, I came that night, and I came by myself, and I walked up the ramp, and I lost it. I just got so emotional, I couldn't believe it. In fact, I'm getting emotional right now.
I parked around the corner on 14th Street, and as I came around the corner, immediately I felt like I was back in high school again. Things seemed the same. I felt like I was coming to the theater again, and started to look for the little restaurant that was next door that we always went to after the movies, so it was a wonderful feeling.
I was in the 7th grade at Roosevelt Junior High School. We lived on 13th and H. My mother had a boarding and rooming house for men. She said women are too hard to please. And we could walk very easily from there down to the State Theater, my sister and I. clutching our dime in our hands, and we congregated with all of the other children who were waiting outside of the theater for the doors to open. And it was very exciting. And for us, a dime was big money.
My earliest memories of the stage had to do with either taking my children to movies here, but probably more importantly was the women's group that came here for its lecture series, Omega Nu. One of the guest speakers was Alex Haley, and of course he drew an enormous number of people, and it was very profound and much enjoyed by everyone.
First, my name's Jan Sasso. Rose Sasso was my aunt. She was really proud to run the theater. Saturdays, this is where everyone would come. Always well dressed. I'm probably one of the few people could see her sitting at a kitchen table with her pajamas on drinking coffee. But you would never see her leave the house unless she was decked out, nice suits, always a brooch, hair always done nice.
Rose was very particular about our appearance. She wanted us to meet her standards, which we did. Rose was a wonderful, wonderful manager, and we gave her our all.
Frankly, the fondest memories I have are coming to the State Theater with my mother. I remember coming to see Vertigo here, which was, I think, the first Hitchcock film I'd ever seen. And she brought me here, and I saw that film, and it really opened my eyes to what I consider great filmmaking.
My earliest memories of the State Theater is, I remember I was very young. My dad was going to school. He was a teacher. He worked part-time here on the weekends and during the summer. And I remember he brought me here quite a bit, and especially during the days when there were no movies showing, when he would be up here prepping or doing whatever, I would pretty much have the place to myself. I'd be able to run around. And actually right now my daughters are down there running around pretty much emulating the same behavior and activities that I used to do.
There was always a chapter of a serial, and each chapter ended with a cliffhanger. And the cliffhanger left you just breathless to know what was going to happen the next week.
They were going to put usherettes in, and if I would come back and manage the theater, he would let me choose the usherettes. I went back to work, and I did hire the usherettes.
I got this job at the State, and I was just nuts about it. I was so delighted to be able to get to work here. This was a really prime place to work.
There were no jobs for girls in those days unless you wanted to be a waitress or work in the fruit sheds in the summer. And a very coveted job was usherette.
It was so much fun here, and I loved the camaraderie among the other usherettes. We did wear uniforms, and we had summer ones and we had winter ones.
They did have a jacket that had piping around it.
And the summer ones were a lot thinner, and they were navy blue, and I know they had big flary legs on the bottom like the sailors' bell bottoms.
My first memories, although I'm sure I came before that, was going to see Gone with the Wind here. And what a spectacle. I mean, it was in color, and of course I was always very taken with the usherettes because I thought, what a wonderful job. You could see the movies all the time, and they had such cute little uniforms, and they were so cute. And you know, what a great way to meet boys.
And what I remember about it is that we always sat down in these seats because there was less money. We didn't go to the loges until I came home from World War II and took her up to the loges.
That was special.
My connection with the State Theater is that my mother, Marguerite Grinstead, was the first spotlight girl when the theater opened in 1934. She stood in the spotlight in the lobby and wore a beautiful gown and greeted the patrons as they came in. And she was not the original choice for the spotlight girl, but when Mr. Mann, the theater owner, came for the opening, he saw her and she had beautiful red hair, so he wanted her to stand under the spotlight. And while she was working here, she met my father, and his name was Bill Owen. He worked as a projectionist, moonlighting here. And some prankster had thrown a stink bomb in the theater, and all the employees had to run and find it, and that's how the two of them met and subsequently married, and were married for 63 years.
We had to stand at a certain station to make sure that, you know, things things didn't go awry in the room, and sometimes they did.
The kids were cut-ups, and the movies were packed, and people would throw popcorn boxes, and you learned after a while not to sit under the balcony because of sprays of soda that would come down and get on you, and I think I was one of those that delighted in tipping over a cup once in a while.
Those kids up in the balcony did naughty things. I will be discreet and say they blew up balloons, but they were not balloons. Yelled and hollered and hooted and whistled, and nobody could control them, but they did it every Saturday night.
I went to the State and I went to the Clavell. I don't think the Clavell's there anymore. The Clavell was all the Godzilla movies, and the State was all Lawrence of Arabia's. So, you know, every once in a while we go to the movies. I wasn't that into movies in those days.
Is when it was first built and it was advertised very highly, it was air conditioned. That was a big thing. So in 1934 to have a big building like this air conditioned, yes, that was unique. The Battle of Midway came out in June 1942, and the theater rented one film of the Battle of Midway. The State would show it, then I would take down to the Princess Theater, which is just a few blocks down the street. They would show it, then I'd bring it back here. And so I've seen the Battle of Midway many times.
But I came to work here the summer of 1970. It was my first job, and I was so excited. My boss, Mrs. Sasso, Rose Sasso, always asked us to have people take their feet off the back of the chairs. So that was my job here.
We all rode bicycles in that days, and nobody had a bicycle lock. No one thought of having a bicycle lot. You pull up out in front, lean your bike against the wall, come in, watch a movie. Hour and a half or two later, you go out and your bike is still there. Walk down to White's for Boys, look at the clothing on the next corner, which is, I see, is gone now. So those were really wonderful days for me growing up here in Modesto.
My earliest memories of the State Theater are watching it being built. We would walk down and watch the progress, and eventually got to see the State open. I do remember seeing Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen before they became famous in the early 30s, right after the State opened up. And the reason I remember is because they were interesting in and of themselves. But then later, when I heard them on the radio, you know, in Hollywood, and then later saw pictures of them, and they finally were in the movies, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the same man and that dummy that was there at the State Theater.
It was just our wonderful place we worked. We were a family. We girls that worked here. Rose was like a mother to us. Back behind the stage, there's a cellar down there, and we popped corn at certain times, and we'd have different ones go down and they pop corn. During the popping of the corn, there was a blower that blew that odor, smell of that wonderful popcorn through the theater, and I think that's when we sold the most popcorn.
In my high school years, there was a midnight preview, which was that was a change of movie, and it played at Saturday night at midnight, and that was the one that played for the rest of the week. And it became de rigueur for high school students to attend that particular showing.
The very first movie I ever saw, my grandmother brought me to the State Theater. I think it was probably in 1941. And it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was pure magic. We fast forward a few years, and the very first date that I had with my late husband, George, he brought me here, and we sat in the loges, of course we did, and we saw a Nestor Williams movie. It was wonderful, and yes, for us, the rest was history.
The variety of films that it shows, it has something for everybody. I don't care what your political bent is or how old you are. It's a history lesson. I've taken my kids here to see silent films. I've taken my kids here to see the great artists of the past. Cultural literacy is so important.
I remember From Here to Eternity. I remember An American in Paris, which I loved, one of my favorite movies. I loved the dancing. I loved all of MGM movies.
When they refurbished the theater, I was thrilled beyond relief. I mean, I remember when they first reopened it and just the nostalgia coming back like a wave. Remembering exactly where I sat with my first boyfriend at La Loma Junior High, and you know, we held hands in that particular seat. So when the state reopened, I truly wanted to support in whatever way I could.
Hi, I'm Jerry Olivares. I was a projectionist here from 1979 to about 1990, 91. They converted it to a Hispanic theater. It was one of the first here in the Central Valley. When they first opened, it was hugely successful. Without hesitation, I would say this was the #1 hotspot between, I would say, 1979 to about 1986, 87. My mother and my father ran the theater for my uncles, and they were very innovative. So they had candies and popcorn, the usual stuff, but my father had a very famous sandwich called a torta that was very popular. I remember that. We couldn't make them fast enough. I remember I would be, sometimes I would have to run the movies and I'd have to run downstairs and I'd have to make sandwiches for my dad and I'd have to time it. They were 20 minutes. So I would look at my watch, run downstairs, hopefully get the time right, but sometimes I would be making sandwiches and I'd hear, hey, 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 and I go, oh no, so I'd have to run all the way back upstairs, hurry up, and flip the screen, the movie to the other reel.
Through negotiations with Mr. Leo Valdivia, who owned it, this was a Spanish language film theater, and he was hardly using it anymore. We decided to buy it. There was a market as Modesto was becoming more sophisticated to show a lot of the foreign films. Being open for probably 6 months, we decided to do some music. Jazz, Celtic. At one point, we even developed our own state theater big band under the direction of Ernie Busio.
My musical involvement with the State Theater, when I read in the paper that they were thinking about renovating it and using it for things other than just movies. I had done a few events with John Griswold, and so I approached him about doing a concert as a fundraiser at that time. Basically, that's what our concert was to try to show people the kind of music that we could play and that other groups could play in here. We did opera, we did Broadway, we did Sousa marches, we did big band stuff, some modern jazz stuff, a lot of vocals, and just try to showcase what could be done in here. Started bringing in guest artists as diverse as Myron Florin from the Lawrence Welk Show. We packed the house. That's John Faddis, James Moody, Bill Watrous, and also, you know, when the State Theater hired people like Little Anthony and the Imperials, we backed them up. Even Rich Little came in and he needed some musical accompaniment. We would provide that for them. It's been a good thing, I think, for everybody all around, for the theater, for the community, for us as musicians.
We formed a board of directors of outstanding local citizen leaders. We teamed up with the management team at the Modesto Symphony Orchestra, who provided us in the inception of the revitalization of the State Theater and through its initial operations with operational leadership and a tremendous amount of wisdom and help. Had to face a lot of unknowns in an old structure. We were blessed to have some of the most competent help in the Central Valley working with us, most of them donating their time to help make sure that structure was intact, that the murals were properly restored, that the facility, you know, was brought back to life.
That we have accomplished so many things in the last 5-6 years, converting to digital projection. That has improved our film program vastly. We also replaced our cinema sound system. And so when you come to the theater, the quality of sound has improved so much. We have a new marquee, and it's digital. Everything's gone digital. Some of the things we're planning for the future, because we are going to continue growing this business, are building out our concessions area. So that's going to double in size, and we're hoping to finish that project by the end of this year.
I think it's really great for us to honor the past and to honor venues like this that have so much thought and care put into their architecture design.
I think anything that anyone does to keep it in the public eye, I think is very good.
It was a very big part of our life. I'm very grateful for it being here. And they've done a beautiful job on restoring it. And I'm so glad they did. What a shame if this had been lost. It'd take a lot of memories away.